Hello everyone, I'm Justin and this is part 1 of our Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 2 recap. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know any time we upload a new video. Coming off the huge critical and commercial success that was Phase 1 of the MCU, Marvel Studios look to continue putting together the building blocks for their eventually massive cast of heroes in Phase 2. Phase 2 continues to tell the stories of the original 5 Avengers, as well as introducing a few new heroes as the Infinity Saga truly begins to unfold. And with Marvel now officially ushering in the Multiverse Saga, which includes Phases 4 to 6, we've decided to finally continue our recaps and explanations of each phase, which we'd started a few months ago with Phase 1. We'll leave a link to that video in the description so you can check it out if you haven't already, as well as links to all the projects that make up Phase 2 so you can watch those before continuing on with parts 1 and 2 of our recap. Phase 2 opens with a narration from Tony Stark, recalling a quote he once heard, "We create our own demons," before segueing into a flashback from a 1999 party on New Year's Eve in Bern, Switzerland, which Tony had attended along with his bodyguard Happy Hogan and met genetic biologist Maya Hansen. As the three were headed to his hotel room, he was approached by Dr. Ho Yinsen, the man he was later abducted alongside by the Ten Rings in the first Iron Man film, in which Yinsen actually described this first interaction between them. Stark's then approached by Aldrich Killian, a nerdy scientist with a limp, seeking their support for his scientific research and development agency, Advanced Idea Mechanics, aka AIM, and Tony makes it seem that he's actually interested in working with Killian, making plans for them to meet on the roof in 5 minutes, but he never actually shows up since his only real focus that night was getting it on with Maya. We're then taken back to the present as Tony's in the midst of creating the Mark 42, another of many suits he's built to distract himself from the trauma he endured during the Battle of New York, although that now seems to be the least of his problems thanks to the rise of the Mandarin, the assumed leader of the Ten Rings who's been interrupting television broadcasts and taking credit for 9 bombings across the country. To assure the public that the US government is capable of handling this terrorist, they've taken the War Machine, Colonel James Rhodes, and gave him a rebrand into the Iron Patriot. Meanwhile, at Stark Industries, Pepper, who's still working as CEO, is scheduled to meet with a no longer physically disabled Aldrich Killian, who's there to present his company's new idea called Extremis, which he believes, with the backing and funding of Stark Industries, can allow humans to upgrade their mind and DNA. But once again, Stark Industries ends up rejecting his offer. As Killian exits with his bodyguard Eric Savin, Happy Hogan, who's now Stark Industries head of security, makes it a priority to keep an eye on them, believing them to be up to no good. And his suspicions are confirmed later as he witnesses Savin handing over a briefcase containing what appears to be some sort of drug to a man named Jack Taggart. Happy manages to gain possession of one of the objects inside the briefcase, but as he's leaving, he's stopped and threatened by Savin, so he punches him in the face, cutting open his nose. But Savin's wound heals in a matter of seconds as his skin emits an orange glow before he then launches Happy into a food stand. As Savin stalks towards him though, Taggart inhales whatever was inside the briefcase, causing him to self-destruct, destroying the surrounding area and severely injuring Happy, while Savin's injuries once again completely heal themselves. Another Mandarin broadcast airs shortly after the explosion, which the Mandarin claims to have been behind, and this revelation prompts Tony to make a statement to the press, promising to get revenge, even giving up his home address in hopes of a confrontation. When he gets home, he hears his doorbell ring, but it isn't the Mandarin and is actually Maya Hansen, who claims she needs to speak to him about something urgent and tries to get him and Pepper out of town. But before they can do anything, his home's attacked by 3 Mandarin helicopters, and the resulting explosion sends them flying back, though Tony manages to protect Pepper by summoning his Mark 42 suit onto her. Once she's clear of the structure, he summons the suit back onto him, and begins taking out the choppers one by one, but he's unable to take out the final of the 3 before being dragged underwater by the rubble. Assuming they've killed him, the chopper exits the scene, but Tony, with the help of his AI Jarvis, manages to make his way back above water and fly up into the sky, although he passes out as he goes airborne. And when he wakes up, he finds himself crash landing in Tennessee after the suit's power drops below 5% before completely shutting down. He eventually stumbles upon a seemingly empty shed where he's soon met by a kid named Harley Keener, who recognizes him as Iron Man, so he lets him stay to fix and charge his suit. After some time, Jarvis gets back up and running and manages to find the Mandarin's location, but unfortunately, the power source charging his suit is unlikely to successfully revitalize it. So without access to his suit, Tony instead moves ahead with Harley's idea to just build something new, and spends the night creating some homemade gadgets that he uses the next day to take out each of the Mandarin's bodyguards on his way to eventually confronting the man himself. But it turns out the Mandarin seen on TV isn't real and was actually all orchestrated by Killian, using the Ten Rings' reputation to cover up the fatal effects of his Extremis experiments, with the actor portraying him, Trevor Slattery, just being an oblivious drug addict that also happened to be an aspiring actor. Immediately following this revelation, Savin appears behind Stark and knocks him out, and when he wakes up, he's met by Maya Hansen. Earlier, it was revealed that Maya's actually been working for Killian as well, with Extremis being her creation, and aided him in kidnapping Pepper to be used as an incentive to force Stark into helping stabilize neutralize their project. But she suddenly has a change of heart after witnessing Pepper forcefully being given a dosage of extremis and threatens to kill herself in order to get Killian to let them go. But Killian no longer has any use for her anyway and shoots her himself, under the belief that Tony will take over her responsibilities. He then exits to force Rhodey, who they'd captured earlier, out of his Iron Patriot suit, which he plans on using to lure in and kill the president so that he can gain full control over both sides of terror in the US. Eventually, Tony does manage to escape captivity though, upon realizing his suit's likely charged up thanks to the beeping of a door watch Harley gave him, and summons it to take out each of the guards still on location and meet up with Rhodey. Meanwhile, Savin's already arrived on the president's plane, Air Force One, in the Iron Patriot suit, and plants a bomb on board as the president's put in the suit and sent off the plane to Killian. But before Savin can escape, Iron Man arrives and kills him with a blast through the chest. The bomb still goes off though, and multiple passengers are sent flying out the side of the plane. But miraculously, Iron Man's able to save them in a group effort. He then goes to search for the president, but immediately flies right into oncoming traffic, dismantling the suit which Tony had been controlling from the speedboat he and Rhodey had escaped on. Still, they're eventually able to make it to the location of Killian's planned murder of the president, which is completely surrounded by extremist-enhanced individuals. So Tony calls for Jarvis to send in each of his recently built Iron Man suits and lets them loose onto Killian's men. As Rhodes finds and frees the president before re-entering his suit and escaping, Tony also puts on one of his suits and makes his way over to Pepper, who's stuck under some rubble as a result of the ensuing battle. But as he goes to help her out, he's attacked by Killian, who comes burning through the floor beneath him. Tony's able to take him out for a moment by cutting off one of his arms as he goes for a fatal strike, but his dismembered arm burns through the floor and ultimately causes Pepper to fall to the ground 200 feet below to her presumed death. A vengeful Tony then engages in a back and forth brawl with Killian, throughout which he uses multiple different suits, as well as a returning Mark 42 that he summons onto Killian and has self-destruct. But Killian manages to survive the explosion and wanders out through the flames, only to be struck in the face by a still alive Pepper, who survived thanks to the extremist treatment and puts an end to Killian for good. Pepper's still freaked out by her current condition, but Tony promises to help create a cure for her, and nearly losing her brings him to the decision that he no longer needs any distractions. So he orders Jarvis to remotely destroy each of his Iron Man suits, and later decides to finally undergo surgery to remove the shrapnel embedded in his heart, allowing him to remove the arc reactor from his chest as well. So he chucks the arc reactor into the ocean, although he does proclaim in his narration that he'll always be Iron Man, which is actually revealed to be a therapy session with Dr. Bruce Banner, who'd fallen asleep listening to Tony's story. Jumping back a bit to immediately following the Battle of New York, Thor and Loki return to Asgard with the Tesseract, and upon their return, Loki's brought before Odin and is given a life sentence in prison for his crimes against humanity. 1 year later in Vanaheim, Thor leads Asgard in a battle against the Marauders, a group of invaders that have been terrorizing the Nine Realms since the destruction of the Bifrost, which has since been rebuilt. And following their victory, the Asgardians, other than Hogun, who stays on Vanaheim to help his people, return to Asgard and celebrate the reformed peace between the Nine Realms. Thor is then approached with the possibility of taking the throne by his father, but Thor claims he's not yet ready to be king, to Odin's dismay, who believes this is due to his feelings for Jane Foster, who Thor later meets with Heimdall to check in on, just as he's done every day since the last time he saw her. But oddly this time, Heimdall's unable to see her. Prior to this on Earth, Jane, Darcy, and Darcy's intern Ian were in London exploring strange signals being picked up by her scientific equipment that hadn't been detected since Thor's landing in New Mexico, and traveled to where the signal was the highest, arriving at an abandoned storage house, inside of which they see a number of portals altering the laws of physics. Suddenly, Jane's equipment begins beeping rapidly, so she follows it to a portal that she's then sucked into, and finds herself in a dark chasm in which she sees and reaches out towards a red substance. But in doing so, she allows it to attach to her and infest her body as she passes out. When she wakes up, she's suddenly back in London, and is informed by Darcy that she'd been gone for 5 hours, which worried her enough to call the police. They're then unexpectedly met by Thor, who Jane greets with a slap across the face, angry that he hadn't visited her in 2 years. Police then approach Jane and attempt to arrest her for trespassing, but when the officer touches her, a powerful force pushes him back. Thor, worried for her well-being, takes her back to Asgard, which angers Odin, and he orders for her to be taken back to Earth. But again, when being touched by one of the guards, the surge of power blasts them back, and Odin recognizes this to be the cause of an ancient relic inside of her, called the Ether. He explains that millennia ago, the Dark Elves reigned absolute and unchallenged under their leader Malekith, who had made a weapon out of their darkness called the Ether, an ever-changing fluid seeking out host bodies and drawing strength from their life force. Malekith attempted to use the Ether to return the universe to darkness, but Odin's father Bor managed decides to defeat him and kill every remaining Dark Elf, ushering in a peace that lasted thousands of years. But as it turns out, Malekith is still alive and has recently awakened on Svartalfheim after sensing the Aether's activation, signaling the beginning of the Convergence, an event that occurs every 5,000 years where the worlds align perfectly, and during which the borders between worlds become blurred, hence why reality on Earth had been altered. And upon his wake, Malekith proclaims that he'll reclaim the Aether and restore their world, and looks to begin this conquest by sending his trusted and loyal lieutenant Algrim to be captured by Asgardians while in disguise as a marauder. Once inside Asgard's prison, Algrim uses vile technology to take the form of the superpowered warrior Curse, before breaking out of his cell and freeing a majority of their prisoners, except for Loki, forcing Thor to leave Jane with Frigga while he attempts to fight off the escaped prisoners. The chaos allows Malekith to lead a squadron of ships into the palace, where he's met by Frigga, looking to protect Jane, and the two battle until Frigga becomes overwhelmed as Curse joins the fight, and this allows Malekith to make his way towards Jane. But when he attempts to grab her, she's revealed to be an illusion conjured by Frigga, so he turns his attention back to her and orders Curse to kill her. Thor then arrives, but just a moment too late, and they're able to escape. Following a funeral ceremony for Frigga and the fallen Asgardians, a grieving Odin has Jane confined. Thor confronts him about this and suggests taking Jane to Svartalfheim so they can lure Malekith away from Asgard, but Odin doesn't want to take the risk of losing and would rather fight to the last Asgardian breath. So Thor, valuing the lives of his people, puts together a plan with Heimdall, Fandral, Volstagg, and Sif to break Loki out of prison so that he can get them off of Asgard without using the Bifrost, as he did for himself in the previous Thor film, and Loki agrees to take part in their escape, seeking vengeance for his mother's death. So he, Thor, and Jane travel through Loki's secret pathway to Svartalfheim, where they're quickly met by Malekith. Now needing his help in battle, Thor releases Loki from his handcuffs, but just as he does, Loki seemingly betrays him once again, stabbing him in the stomach and slicing off his hand. He then offers Jane up to Malekith in return for a good seat from which to watch Asgard burn, and Malekith agrees before draining the Aether from her body. But once the separation is complete, Loki puts down his illusions and reveals his betrayal to have been a ruse, and Thor then summons Mjolnir and attempts to destroy the Aether, but fails as it's indestructible. So Malekith's able to absorb its power before escaping with his minions, while Curse battles Thor. Curse gains the upper hand in their battle, but before he can kill Thor, Loki stabs him through the torso with a sword. His attack proves to be ineffective though, as Curse pulls him onto the sword as well, but this allows Loki to press one of Curse's implosion bombs and kill him as a result. Loki then apologizes to his brother, and Thor says he'll inform their father of his sacrifice, but Loki claims he didn't do it for him before seemingly dying in his arms. With Malekith now in possession of the Aether, and them being stuck on Svartalfheim, it appears they failed in stopping him. But suddenly, Jane receives a phone call, bringing her to the realization that a portal must be nearby, and they quickly find said portal and walk through it back to London, where they meet with Darcy, Ian, and Dr. Selvig, the latter having been studying the effects of the Convergence for months, and having developed devices that can teleport anything to different worlds. Selvig pulls out a map to find the coordinates of the Convergence based on the previous Convergence, during which there were objects built to map where the Convergence would peak, and with this information, Jane speculates that Malekith will look to fire the Aether at a spot where all 9 realms are connected, creating a universal impact, so they find the peak of the Convergence and begin setting up their plan. But as they do, Malekith arrives and engages in a battle against Thor, during which the two are sent through various portals throughout the city by Jane using Selvig's device. Malekith eventually gains the opportunity to begin unleashing the Aether, but Thor puts a stop to him by stabbing him through the chest with one of Selvig's devices, that he then uses to send him back to Svartalfheim, along with his ship that crashes on top of and kills him. Before long, Thor returns to Asgard and speaks with Odin, who says the alignment has brought all the realms together. So he once again offers Thor to take the throne, but still Thor declines, claiming even Loki understood rule as he never could, and instead he decides to leave Asgard to be closer to Jane, thanking Odin as he does. Meanwhile, now having captured the Aether, the Asgardians decide to transport it to another location, since Odin's vault already contains the Tesseract, and as Volstagg says, to keep 2 Infinity Stones in the same place would be unwise. So they hand it over to Tenelir Tavan, aka the Collector, but as they leave, he reveals plans of capturing the remaining 5 stones. Back on Earth, we meet up with Steve Rogers on a morning jog in Washington, D.C. as he runs laps around a man named Sam Wilson. We learn that Sam's a veteran United States Air Force pararescue trooper who now works as a counselor for veterans suffering from PTSD at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, as the two bond over their shared struggle to adapt to life after serving. Before Natasha Romanoff arrives and takes Rogers on a mission to rescue hostages on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s mobile satellite launch platform, the Lumerian Star, which has been taken over by a group of hired pirates led by Georges Batroc, a former sergeant in the French army that had become a freelance mercenary after being discharged. Cap and Romanov work alongside S.H.I.E.L.D.'s counter-terrorist special mission unit, Strike, led by Brock Rumlow, to eliminate the pirates and rescue the hostages. But after Cap defeats Batroc in a brawl, he discovers that Fury had sent Romanoff on her own separate mission to extract the SHIELD intel from the ship, which leads to an argument between the two that allows Batroc to escape. Once they get back to SHIELD headquarters, Rogers confronts Fury about the situation, so Fury attempts to regain his trust by introducing him to Project Insight, which consists of 3 SHIELD helicarriers that'll be launched into the air and that'll read a terrorist's DNA and neutralize them before they can become a threat. Cap's appalled by the project though, claiming that holding a gun to everyone on Earth won't make them feel safe, but will make them afraid and violates their freedom. He then exits to later visit an elderly Peggy Carter, now in a retirement home and suffering from dementia, and he speaks with her about his current dilemma, explaining that he still has the desire to fight, but feels that might not be the right thing to do anymore. But she assures that he'll know what's right for him before she's overcome with the symptoms of her dementia. Meanwhile, Fury tries to and fails in attempting to access the intel on the USB he received from Romanoff, so he informs the Secretary of the World Security Council, Alexander Pierce, and convinces him to delay Project Insight, believing that someone's working against them from the inside. Soon after, while on his way to meet with Agent Maria Hill, he's attacked by assassins impersonating police officers, and although he's able to escape them, he's quickly tracked down by a masked man, who shoots an exploding disc under his car that flips it over. But as he approaches the vehicle to finish the job, Fury manages to escape him as well, by cutting a hole through the ground and heading to Cap's apartment through the sewers, where he reveals to him that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been compromised before suddenly being shot several times through a window by the masked man. So he hands the USB drive over to Cap and tells him not to trust anyone, as he falls unconscious. And the two are soon joined by Cap's neighbor, who we saw him sort of flirting with earlier, and who's revealed to actually be Special Agent 13 of S.H.I.E.L.D., sent by Fury to keep an eye on Rogers. So she stays with Fury while Cap pursues the masked man, chasing him to the top of a neighboring building and throwing his shield at him, but the man effortlessly catches it with his cybernetic arm and throws it back at him before escaping. Fury's then taken to a nearby hospital where doctors pronounce him dead and Maria Hill collects his body. Cap's then informed by Rumlow that Secretary Pierce wants to meet with him, so before he leaves the hospital, he hides the USB in a nearby vending machine. And upon arriving at the SHIELD Triskelion, Pierce asks him why Fury was at his apartment, but Cap insists he doesn't know. So Pierce explains what he thinks caused Fury's death, revealing they captured Batroc and found information that gave them reason to believe that Fury was the one who hired the pirates as a cover for the acquisition and sale of classified intelligence. But Cap stands strong in his belief in Fury, saying that if Pierce really knew him, he'd know that's not true. He then makes his way out of the building, entering an elevator that quickly fills up when he's joined by Rumlow and multiple strike operatives, who he realizes are planning to capture him. Although at a severe numbers disadvantage, Cap's able to knock them all out and escape by jumping out of the elevator, which forces Pierce to declare Rogers a fugitive from S.H.I.E.L.D. for withholding information on Fury's death. And with the World Security Council believing Fury to be working against them, they immediately reactivate Project Insight. Rogers heads back to the hospital to grab the USB from the vending machine, but instead finds it now in the possession of Romanoff, who's managed to figure out what's really going on and offers her help in tracking down Fury's killer, who she knows as the Winter Soldier, credited with over 24 assassinations in the last 50 years, and whom she'd encountered once before, being shot by him as a means of killing a nuclear engineer that'd been under her watch. So the two take the USB to an Apple store in an attempt to access it, but all they're able to find is the location where the program on the USB was written. When they get there, Cap realizes they're at his World War II training camp, Camp Lehigh, and there they find a secret storage room full of old computers, although with a modern looking USB slot beside them, that they then put their USB into, which powers up the computers that are revealed to contain the mind of Arnim Zola, who we saw work under the Red Skull back in Captain America the First Avenger, before he was captured by the US Army. He explains that after being recruited by S.H.I.E.L.D. following World War II, he'd received a terminal diagnosis, and so his mind was transferred into computers, which allowed him to continue aiding HYDRA in secretly infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. He reveals that HYDRA was also responsible for the deaths of Tony's father Howard and Nick Fury as they built towards the creation of Project Insight, that once complete and with the use of his algorithm will begin the rise of HYDRA's New World Order. Cap questions him further, but before he can get more information, a S.H.I.E.L.D. missile destroys the bunker, although Cap's able to protect himself and Romanoff with his shield. The two then escape Rumlow and his men once again, so Rumlow requests they call in the asset, revealed to be the Winter Soldier, who meets with Secretary Pierce at his home and is ordered to kill Cap and Romanoff, who've gone into hiding at Sam Wilson's house, and there Sam offers his help in capturing Jasper Sitwell, a high-ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who they've deduced to be a HYDRA infiltrator, and who just finished a meeting with Senator Stern, last seen in Iron Man 2, and who's also a HYDRA conspirator. Sam's able to lure Sitwell to the top of a building under the threat of a bullet to the chest, and there he's met by Cap, but despite his interrogation, he refuses to give up any information. So Romanoff kicks him off the roof, though to be caught by Sam with the use of his advanced personal flight suit that he'd used during his time on the Force, and this scares Sitwell into giving up information on Zola's algorithm, explaining it's a program for choosing targets that could be a threat to HYDRA in order to kill them a few million at a time. So the four head to the Triskelion, planning to use Sitwell to access the helicarriers, but they're soon attacked by the Winter Soldier, who tosses Sitwell into oncoming traffic. The attack eventually boils down to him and Cap engaging in an intense back and forth fight that ultimately leads to the Winter Soldier being unmasked and revealing him to be Cap's best friend, Bucky Barnes, who had presumably died during World War II.
Bucky? Who the hell is Bucky?
Romolo and his men then arrive and arrest the trio, but while the three are in the prison van, one of the guards takes out the other and reveals himself to be Maria Hill, who then takes them to a secret facility where a still alive Nick Fury is resting, explaining he'd faked his death in order to escape HYDRA by using a drug made by Bruce Banner called Tetrodetoxin B that slows the pulse to 1 beat a minute. Meanwhile, at a HYDRA facility, Bucky begins having flashbacks of his past, including his death and the experiments HYDRA did on him, prompting him to attack a nearby doctor, which forces Pierce to have him brainwashed once again so he can complete the mission without hesitation. Meanwhile, the heroes form a plan to breach the SHIELD helicarriers and replace the targeting blades with their own. They then head to the SHIELD Triskelion and manage to break into the building and take control of the communication systems, over which Rogers reveals HYDRA's infiltration to all of SHIELD and that Alexander Pierce is their leader, imploring them not to launch the helicarriers as it could lead to millions of innocent lives lost. In response, Rumlow and his men enter the control room and threaten the employees to launch the helicarriers at gunpoint, but Agent 13 intervenes and a gunfight ensues, during which Rumlow manages to launch them himself. Meanwhile, Pierce had been in a meeting with the other members of the World Security Council to celebrate the launch of Project Insight, but now that they know his true intentions, he looks to kill them. But his attempts are thwarted by Romanoff, disguised as Councilwoman Pamela Hawley, using a photostatic veil, and he's held at gunpoint as she attempts to upload all of SHIELD and HYDRA's secure files to the internet, though she finds she's unable to do so, as Pierce informs her that she'll need 2 alpha-level members of SHIELD to disable the encryption. But just then, Nick Fury returns and disables the encryption using a backup retinal scan of his damaged eye, since Pierce had erased his original scan, while forcing Pierce to scan his retina as well. And this allows Romanoff to upload the files, including her own, revealing her dark past to the world. Before the two can take him into custody though, Pierce threatens to kill Romanoff with the use of a mobile device connected to the badges he'd given to the Security Council members, so Fury's forced to shoot and kill him before the two escape in a helicopter. Meanwhile, Cap and Sam have managed to replace 2 of the targeting blades, but as Sam attempts to place the final one, the Winter Soldier appears and takes him out of the air, damaging his jetpack and leaving him grounded. So Cap's forced to face off with Bucky once again, eventually momentarily incapacitating him with a chokehold before placing the chip on the final helicarrier, which programs the three to destroy one another. Bucky ends up trapped under part of the structure as it's being destroyed, but Cap's able to help him out from under it. Still, even after Cap puts down his shield and refuses to fight back, Bucky looks to kill him, tackling him to the ground and repeatedly punching him with his cybernetic arm, but he hesitates just before landing what could have been a fatal strike. A large piece of rubble then breaks the platform they'd been fighting on, and Cap falls into the water below. But before he drowns, Bucky drags him out onto land. Sometime later, Fury has himself declared officially dead and destroys any evidence of him being alive, while Romanoff sets out to find a new identity, since her past has been completely uploaded to the internet. But before she goes, she gives Cap a file with information on the Winter Soldier experiments, which Cap hopes he can use to find Bucky and remind him who he is. Although they believe they finally put an end to HYDRA, we see later that one of their leaders, Baron von Strucker, had secretly gained possession of Loki's scepter following the Battle of New York and began using it to create an army of enhanced individuals. But only 2 of his test subjects survive, with those being Sokovian twins Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, who Strucker plans on unleashing against the Avengers. And that was part 1 of our MCU Phase 2 recap, with part 2 releasing tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see more videos like this, just click the second link in the description for our Marvel playlist. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.